Good morning, class. This little video is just going to talk a little bit about wall types. We have kind of gone through these in class a little bit, but I just want to kind of reiterate some of the things we talked about just so that you have this video as a reference. So one of the things that we talked about is on sheets A8 and A8.1 is that all the wall types for the project are identified. So if you wanted to go through and start to build these walls and use them as reference for as we're drawing, that'd be one way. The other way is to kind of go through and build them as you're building each floor type. One of the things you'll notice as you start to look through there is we have kind of metal stud wall types that are kind of identified here, and then we have wood wall types that are identified here. And these are, if you go in, one of the things is the way that the Snow Cryolic firm has identified that is with the either IM for metal or IW for wood. And so as you're going through and developing each one of these wall types, using the numbers, these will be really good indicators for what type of wall. And typically the wood walls are on second floor, and then of course on third level all the way up. The other page really is the CP walls. These are all the exterior walls. So we've kind of gone through the CP3 kind of around the stair core, and also how the CP3 is on the elevator core. We also have the CP1, which is a metal stud wall with the exterior cladding, and then of course the CP4, which is at that retaining wall. And so I was going to go through a little bit on how these walls are built. We also have a CP2, which will show up on the upper levels. This is the wood wall exterior. And then we have the CP5, which is actually at the lower level, part of a retaining wall at the lower level. And so for the first level, you should be working with both these CP1 and CP4, and then you will also be working with CP3. In Revit, we have gone through, so as soon as you click on a wall type, this is, if you have started to do your builds, you will see those wall types show up. So I've already got a CP1 in here, but I'll go through that, and then we have a CP4. And then in the cases where we just have structural walls around some of these areas, I have also gone through and started to make those CP SWs, structural walls. We also have W10s, which are masonry walls. And so these will become kind of an inventory as you build each one of these that you'll be able to use throughout the project. Now if we go into the wall types, one of the things that if you're going to modify or change it, we click on Edit Type, and what's important is, as you see this, you can duplicate this if you're going to make modifications, and when you do, rename it, and then you start to go inside here where the wall type becomes laid out. And so we've walked through, one of the things that we're doing is making sure that we understand what the structure is, and then every time we need to add a layer, we would come down here depending on what the wall section is. So in this particular case, I'm going to go back to a wall section, but this is a concrete masonry unit that I have in here. It's like a 12, so this is referencing the W15 wall type. I'm going to cancel out here. I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to pull up the CP3 SW2, which is a concrete wall, which a lot of you have probably done here on this corner. So if we go back to the drawings here, the thing is we started working through the details of the section. So we start out with the core. Now in this case it's either a concrete masonry unit or concrete. So we're going to show concrete in this SW2. We get that from the structural drawings. So that is kind of where these references are in the screen. And then we will also see that show up on the plans where you'll get it will kind of tell us what if it's precast or a structural wall of type, and then we can go back to this menu and check that. Now the building, of course, then has all these different wall types that I've kind of highlighted here in blue and red, red being structural, and these are different kind of wall types that we will start to add to the floor plan and make the types. So the one I'm just going to kind of look at is, of course, the one that we did on these two corners. So if we zoom in, go back to architecture and walls, that's a CP3. What I'm going to do is edit type back here, edit. So here we go, we've got a structural, and I've made that up kind of 1-inch concrete. So if you need to change that material, go in here and project materials. As you add materials for a wall section, these will be in this kind of upper inventory, and then if you don't have it here, then you can type the name in. So if we say metal panel for an exterior cladding, we can see if something comes up, or we might just say metal, and so then we're going to get different types of metal that we can call out. So here, from a metal stud layer to metal furring, which we will actually have for another wall type here I'll show you shortly, and different types of metal. So once that's in, you give the dimension. Now as soon as we have the exterior side, so in this particular case the wall has the concrete, and then we're going to put a membrane layer, and we can see that particular layer show up in the wall section. Let's go to wall section, and so that dashed line is a membrane layer, and you can see it was referred to a WB1, which in the list of products, a WB has kind of a vapor barrier reference. And then on the outside of that, now I've put that in and I've kept that at 0 because it's a kind of a thin film. It's not going to affect our dimensions that much, and so I left it at 0. A lot of times they will give it a thickness, but in this particular case I left that out just so that we can make sure that our dimensions for this space here is always 1 3/4 inches, and then we have a kind of 5/8 panel on the outside. And so all of the CP wall types have this kind of dimension of 2 3/8 in thickness, and so this becomes actually our datum line for how we reference off the grid, which you can see here is a 1 foot 6 inch reference. So on the outside we will be doing the vapor barrier. We have an insulation board which is 3/4. We have an airspace in here that's not showing up, but it's actually 1 inch. So we have that 1 3/4 inches. And then we have the cementitious panel that's 5/8. So that is kind of like a hardy board or kind of a concrete panel that's colored and stained and put on and attached to the outside face. Now, as you guys had visited the site, you realize that they changed this out for metal, but for this initial as-built drawings that we're going to use what was in the drawing. So that would be the cementitious panel. And so if we go back to the Revit, you can see that that's how this lays out. So we've got the membrane layer at 0. We got the substrate, the rigid insulation, at 3/4. Now, this is still left over from when we had done it before, and so I have this at 3/4 inch. So I'm going to change that to 1 inch, and that will help this line, all the different faces line up as I develop them. And then, of course, the concrete. I have a kind of lightweight concrete panel, and that's 5/8 of an inch. So now we've got the outside going to the exterior taken care of. Now we want to come back and see if there's anything that needs to be added to the interior. So if we go back to Revit through the drawing, we see that we have a insulation that has kind of a steel furring. So we put the insulation board, and that's 2 inches. And then there's sheetrock or a gypsum board, and there's a 5/8 on that. So we're going to add that to the inside layer. So this is our kind of structural core, and then these materials have been added to the outside. And so there's our 2-inch rigid insulation and our finished board of 5/8. And so once we have this kind of put together, we can say, okay, this wall type, you can check some other things. So of course they're showing diagonal crosshatch. You could change that to be a different pattern, but for course that works out just fine. We could say that if we wanted it to be, as you're going through and you want to have different kinds of legibility of that, you can change those patterns. But a diagonal crosshatch is pretty generic, and that works out just fine for the course. There's some additional information we can go through here to change some of the properties, but for now, for this class, we're not going to worry about those. Say OK, and now you'll see that my wall has kind of popped out just a hair to take into account that gap. So now I'm going to do a 3D view, and so I have the 2 walls that we just modified. So now we're going to look at the kind of wall types here. We have a metal stud wall, which is a CP1, and we have a concrete block wall, the CP4, that is kind of a retaining wall along here, along this kind of parking lot, and so the grade kind of raises up and down. So this panel ends up being very important for us to make sure we build a kind of a CP4. So I want to go up to walls again. I'm going to look at, I built a CP4, and so let's look at what is in the wall section for a CP4. So here we've got a concrete block showing, which is 7 5/8. We've got a vapor retarder. We have a rigid insulation in here. So we're going to go back and check our drawing. We're going to see if that is correct. So looking at these actually in Photoshop, so I can kind of move around a little better. So that is a CP5, a CP4, it's right here. So there again, we don't have any insulation or anything showing up on the interior, because I think that's where we're going to do some of the furring walls and other walls that will cover over this. But on the outside we have the membrane again, and then we have a steel furring, which is 1 3/4 inches, so we want to remember that. But then we only have an insulation board in here that's 1.5 inches. So that means that we need to kind of show 1.5 inches plus a 1/4 inch air gap, and then we will add the fiber panel. So let's go back to the Revit model and take a look and see what we have. So we have the substrate rigid insulation. Now we have the furring strips that holds that out a little bit further, so what we're missing here is the airspace. So I'm going to insert that airspace. So right now it automatically comes in as structure, so I'm going to bring that down. I'm going to change that to like a thermal or an air layer. Go up here to materials, and we have air. We're going to have an air infiltration barrier. I'm just going to call it air. And we're going to make that 1/4 inch. And then we have the concrete panel on the outside, and there again, it's kind of the same material that we had put on the other wall. So we update that. We say apply. And now this wall is in alignment with the other wall. Now the last wall we're going to take a look at is for the exterior, is the metal stud wall that's on this level, and that's a CP1. So we're going to go up here to walls. We're going to select the CP1, and then we're going to edit that type and check and see if everything matches the drawings for that. So here again we have the structure. Here it's a metal stud that's 6 inches, and that's structural material. Now we do have an interior material, so let's go back and look